Welcome to our channel, where we help you gain valuable insights and knowledge through book summaries. Today, we're diving into the timeless classic, Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. This insightful book offers a comprehensive exploration of invaluable negotiation strategies, providing readers with practical tools and techniques to master the art of negotiation, covering a range of tactics and approaches. So, let's dive into the summary of this incredible book. But before we dive into the content, I kindly request a moment of your time to appreciate this video by liking it, subscribing to the channel, and ringing that notification bell. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Getting to Yes is a groundbreaking book that revolutionizes the way we approach negotiations. Through a series of principles and strategies, Fisher and Ury provide a framework for achieving mutually beneficial agreements in any negotiation scenario. The book introduces the concept of principled negotiation, emphasizing the importance of separating people from the problem, focusing on interests rather than positions, generating options for mutual gain, and insisting on using objective criteria. By following these principles, negotiators can move from a win-lose mentality to a win-win outcome. Fisher and Ury highlight the significance of developing a BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, as a benchmark for assessing the value of any proposed agreement. By understanding your BATNA, you empower yourself with the leverage needed to negotiate effectively. The book also introduces the concept of the yesable proposition, a strategy that involves finding common ground and building trust with the other party. By creating proposals that are easy to accept and align with both parties' interests, negotiators can pave the way for successful agreements. Throughout the book, Fisher and Ury illustrate their principles with real-world examples and case studies, showing how individuals and organizations have applied their strategies to resolve conflicts and negotiate better deals. Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher, William Ury, and Bruce Patton is a guide to negotiating effectively. It offers practical tools for creating win-win solutions and improving communication skills to resolve conflicts. Getting to Yes is considered the reference for successful negotiations. It presents proven tools and techniques that can help you to resolve any conflict and find win-win solutions. Getting to Yes is a practical guide that helps people negotiate effectively by focusing on interests rather than positions. Here's why this book is worth reading. It offers proven strategies for finding common ground and reaching mutually beneficial agreements. Incorporating real-life examples and case studies, the book shows how these techniques can be applied in various situations. With its emphasis on collaborative problem-solving, it provides a refreshing approach to negotiations that can be applied to both personal and professional contexts. Getting to Yes is a handbook for having successful negotiations that teaches everything you need to know about resolving conflicts of all kinds and reaching win-win solutions in every discussion without giving in or making the other person unhappy. My wife and I often talk about how much the world has changed in the last few decades. Just look at house designs and you can see the transformation that society has gone through in the way families interact with each other, for one. And although it might seem like a while ago, it wasn't too far in the past that most arenas of life were controlled by just one person. They were the only ones making the decisions and didn't have to even talk to anyone else to move forward in whatever way they felt was best. Today, it takes multiple people to make all kinds of choices, whether in a family, business, or another realm of life. That means we've got to negotiate to come to solutions that are beneficial to everyone involved, which isn't always easy. Thankfully, we have the timeless book by Roger Fisher, Getting to Yes, How to Negotiate Agreement Without Giving In. Although it was written in the late 1980s, its tips on coming to agreements in all aspects of life are still applicable and will lead to success today. These are the 3 most memorable lessons I got out of this book. Remember that you're always negotiating with other human beings who are just like you in many ways. Don't come into a discussion with the solution you want. Consider all options to reach a win-win outcome. Prepare well and all your negotiations will go well. Let's get right into these ideas and see how much we can learn. Lesson 1. Everybody that you negotiate with is a human being just like you. Although it would be nice, conversations are never a simple discussion of facts by 2 people who are completely rational. In reality, you're always dealing with 2 different sides to the story, 2 separate interpretations of reality. It's important to remember that whoever you're dealing with brings their own values, emotions, experiences, and personalities to the negotiation, and so do you. That'll make it at least a little easier to try to recognize when you're not on the same page. Also, keep in mind that everybody responds differently to the same circumstances. Some may get aggressive after a lengthy and intense discussion, while others end up defensive. Unfortunately, these emotions can make for a completely unproductive conversation once they arise. You might be tempted to use rational arguments to calm the situation, but that won't work when emotions are at play. Every negotiation will always have these two aspects, the factual and the emotional, to it. While it's impossible to separate them, it's important to recognize each and the potential they have to make things difficult. This means addressing and working through intense emotions like fear or anger. You'll need to have empathy, listen well, and consider the other person's viewpoint if you're going to come to a satisfactory resolution. Lesson 2. If you want to reach a win-win outcome, you must consider every option instead of focusing on one solution. Think of the last time you had to negotiate with someone. Did you go in with a clear picture of what you wanted? Were you committed to making it happen no matter what? Chances are, if that was the case, then things didn't turn out how you expected. Fixating on solutions first doesn't work because it only looks at one side of the problem. If you're having a conversation with me and fail to consider what would be in my best interests, you'll have a really tough time convincing me of anything. Instead, you need to open your mind to talking through all sorts of potential solutions. You also must make sure that both people are happy with one of them before agreeing to it. If someone told you that you had to decide who the Nobel Prize winner would be, you wouldn't just go pick a person immediately. You'd make a list of people who might deserve it and choose from that list. Negotiations should be the same way. Think of all negotiations as having two parts. Identify and talk through all potential solutions, considering even extreme options. If necessary, consult experts, draw it out, or brainstorm with each other. Agree on the solution that best meets both of your needs. Lesson 3. The best results come when you prepare for your negotiations well. To get ready for a negotiation, you have to learn as much as possible about all aspects of what you're about to get into. Compile all the information you can and review it carefully. You need to know about the people and the context of the situation to prepare well. Consider what the other person's values are. What are their goals and interests? Are the interests of their bosses or spouses important? Are there other factors that may affect what they want? By preparing as much as possible, you'll understand enough to get your point across well. You'll also significantly increase the chances that you'll come to a fair conclusion for both sides. If you're unprepared, you'll probably end up wasting your time arguing due to unforeseen emotions, prejudices, and assumptions. You also must consider the logistics of your discussion. Where will it happen and at what time? Is it better to be done face-to-face, on the phone, or by email? If you establish a deadline, will that help or make things worse? It might take time to consider all the details, but doing so will prepare you to make the negotiation a positive experience for both sides. And by doing that, you'll be far more likely to end up with a resolution that everybody is happy with. I enjoyed Getting to Yes, although it reminded me of a lot of other books on this subject. The good thing about getting even more negotiation tips, however, is that you'll always need them, so you can never have too many. This book is going to be beneficial to a wide range of people, whether you're in a formal setting or just deciding what movie to watch with your spouse. Those are the individuals who truly deserve to immerse themselves in this extraordinary book. The 29-year-old who is just getting settled into their career and wants to be better at communicating than their managers are. The 55-year-old married couple that doesn't have kids living at home anymore but never really learned to express their needs efficiently. And anyone who needs to get to a win-win solution in a conflict. Who should read Getting to Yes? Anyone interested in improving their negotiation skills, whether for use at work, at home, or both. Anyone who wants to learn how to find win-win solutions to almost any conflict. Roger Fisher was an American professor at Harvard Law School. With his co-authors, he founded the Harvard Negotiation Project. William Ury is an anthropologist who works as a peace negotiator for corporations and governments worldwide. Bruce Patton is a Harvard lecturer and co-founder of Vantage Partners. an international consultancy firm that helps companies improve their negotiations. Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury is a practical guide to negotiating more effectively, whether you're haggling over a price, negotiating for a pay increase, or debating how to divide the housework. The authors propose an alternative to traditional adversarial bargaining, which often results in unfair agreements and strained relationships. Principled negotiation, by contrast, aims to reach wise and fair agreements efficiently and civilly. In addition to walking you through their method, the authors offer numerous tips and techniques for handling challenging negotiations. Anyone can use their method under any circumstances. In our daily lives, we all negotiate with others for things we want, whether the context is business or personal. For instance, at work we may negotiate a contract with a supplier, while at home we may negotiate with siblings over the division of family heirlooms or with a spouse over where to go on vacation. In Getting to Yes, authors Roger Fisher and William Ury point out that the number of situations requiring negotiation is increasing. Organizational structures are less hierarchical than they used to be, and people expect to have a say in decisions that affect them rather than being dictated to by a boss. This requires negotiation. The problem with traditional negotiation. Despite the prevalence of negotiation, however, we don't do it very well. Most people haven't been taught negotiation skills, but a bigger problem is the inadequacy of the age-old adversarial method we use, which the authors call positional bargaining. In positional bargaining, each side starts with a position, argues and defends it, and bargains to reach a compromise. An example is when you bargain with a seller over the price of something. People tend to take one of two approaches: aggressive or friendly, hard or soft. Hard negotiators strive to win by taking the toughest positions and holding out the longest. They may use posturing, threats, and other strong-arm tactics. Those who take a friendlier approach try to avoid conflict and reach an amicable agreement. Neither approach is ideal. Positional bargaining often produces unfair, less than optimal outcomes, and it's inefficient and damages relationships. The solution: principled negotiation. The authors offer an alternative approach, principled negotiation, which is designed to generate fair agreements efficiently and civilly. Negotiators decide issues on the objective merits, facts, and evidence, rather than on what's acceptable or unacceptable to each side, and they look for mutual gains. Where interests conflict, results are based on fair, objective standards. Principled negotiators avoid deceptive tactics, posturing, and threats. Anyone can use principled negotiation in almost any circumstances. There are 4 elements. 1. People, separate personalities and emotions from the issue being negotiated. Because the relationship involves people and their emotions, it gets intertwined with the substance of the negotiations. For example, you may think you're simply pointing out a problem: the warehouse is a mess. But someone on the other side may take it as a personal attack or blaming. Handling people sensitively and respectfully is a prerequisite for successful negotiation and for a constructive ongoing relationship. This is important because most negotiations involve a long-term relationship that's important to maintain. For instance, union members and bosses must be able to work together for a strong company bottom line and job stability. 2. Interests. Focus on the underlying interests of each side, not on positions. Interests involve people's needs, desires, fears, and concerns. They're the reasons behind the positions people take. We're all negotiators. Negotiation is how we get what we want from others in business and personal life. We negotiate with our bosses, clients, sellers, real estate agents, family members, and others. In fact, we reach most decisions in our lives through negotiation, often without realizing it. In Getting to Yes, authors Roger Fisher and William Ury note that the number of situations requiring negotiation keeps increasing, which makes it essential to learn negotiation skills. 20 or more years ago, command and control structures with a chain of bosses ordering our actions were common. Today, however, organizational structures are less hierarchical, more companies emphasize teamwork, and people expect a say in decisions that affect them rather than being dictated to. This requires negotiation. Part 1. Problems with traditional negotiation. The authors identify 3 criteria for successful negotiation that apply to any method. The resulting agreement must be wise, meaning that it meets the interests of each side, and it's fair and lasting. The process must be efficient, producing results without wasting time. The process must strengthen the relationship between the parties, or at least not damage it. Positional bargaining falls short on all 3 counts. Bargaining from positions. In positional bargaining, each side starts with a position, argues and defends it, and bargains to reach a compromise. A classic example is when you haggle with a seller over the price of something. Positional bargaining involves each side offering a series of positions and concessions, which takes considerable time. Each can clearly see what the other wants, and the process usually leads to an agreement that both sides accept. But the agreement it produces doesn't meet the 3 criteria: wise, efficient, and friendly. Part 2. Principled negotiation. Element 1. Separate emotions from issues. In a negotiation, you may be dealing with an institution, company, or organization, but besides the entity, you're dealing with human beings who have different backgrounds, values, biases, emotions, and communication styles. The human aspect can be both a plus and a minus in negotiations. People misunderstand and misinterpret things, which can reinforce the other side's misgivings or spark negative reactions. On the other hand, a good working relationship can help negotiations go smoothly. Also, people's desire to be liked and respected may make them more considerate. In any case, handling people sensitively and respectfully is a prerequisite for successful negotiation. Continually ask yourself whether you're giving enough consideration to human issues. Substance versus relationship. Negotiators are always dealing with 2 issues: the substance of the negotiations and the relationship between the 2 sides. Both issues are important. For instance, a store owner wants to make a profit on a sale, substance, but also create a return customer by sending her away happy the first time, relationship. Element 2. Focus on interests. In standard negotiations, the focus is on coming up with a compromise on conflicting positions, for instance splitting the difference between a union's pay request and a company's smaller offer. Such negotiations over firm positions often reach an impasse. But underlying each side's position are interests, the reasons for the positions. Addressing interests rather than positions often opens the way to an agreement. An example illustrates the difference. 2 men get into an argument at a library because one wants to keep a window open while the other wants to close it. Neither is willing to go halfway. The librarian asks each man for his reasons. One wants the window open to get fresh air. The other wants it closed to avoid a draft. So, the librarian opens a window in an adjoining room to provide airflow and avoid creating a draft. She resolved the conflict by focusing on the men's underlying interests rather than their positions on opening or closing a particular window. Interests explain the problem. In negotiations, you can't come to an agreement without understanding both sides' interests. Interests involve people's needs, desires, fears, and concerns. Invent options for mutual gain. A common challenge in negotiations arises when there doesn't seem to be a way to split the pie that serves both sides. The choice seems to be having a winner and a loser, and neither side wants to lose. But the dilemma opens up the opportunity for creative options that expand the pie before dividing it. A creative solution can break an impasse and result in a better agreement. But standard negotiation methods don't often produce many options. The people on both sides don't see a need for them. They believe they have the right answer, that their position is reasonable, and that it should be accepted. A suggestion to split the difference is as creative as they get. The resulting agreement doesn't serve either party as well as it should. Here are some additional obstacles to generating multiple options during negotiations. Premature criticism. Your inner critic hinders your imagination. You also fear the other side's reaction to a proposal, either dismissing it or taking it as a commitment. You fear jeopardizing your bargaining position. Insist on objective criteria. Standard negotiations are a battle of wills. For instance, with a labor contract, The prevailing side determines the level of pay increases and benefits based on their view of what's appropriate. The agreement won't be efficiently arrived at, and it won't be civil because one side has to back down. It's also unlikely to be a wise agreement, encompassing the interests of both sides. A better alternative is to negotiate an agreement measured against objective standards, independent of the will of either side. Why use objective standards? When you use objective standards, such as market value or average salaries, you're basing the agreement on principle instead of succumbing to pressure tactics or threats to use an arbitrary standard chosen by the other side. Principled negotiation using objective criteria is more likely to produce a fair and balanced agreement efficiently and civilly. Objective standards support the three criteria for a successful negotiation. The authors argue that agreements should be based on objective standards independent of either side, such as market values. Use these questions to determine the objective standards in your own negotiations. Think of a situation where you negotiated with someone over the price of something. What was the rationale behind the price you ended up with? Was it fair? Part 3. Practical application. In the final 2 parts of the book, the authors answer questions about principled negotiation. Because some answers introduce new material or are repetitive, we've reorganized the information into sections on practical application, procedures, tactics, and challenges to make it easier to grasp. Procedures. Informal negotiations with family and friends about such things as where to eat or spend a vacation tend to be impromptu. However, formal negotiations between companies and employees or involving governments and other entities require planning. Here are some logistics and procedural considerations. Deciding where to meet. Deciding where to meet for negotiations will depend on both needs and circumstances. Think about where the parties would be most comfortable and productive. Seclusion may be important if there's a significant chance of interruptions and distractions. If the other side's chief negotiator relies heavily on support staff and documentation, you may want to meet in his or her offices. Meeting in the other side's offices also gives you the option of walking away if necessary. Part 4. Challenges in negotiations. 2 types of challenges that can stymie principled negotiation are dealing with the human element when you can't separate people and their emotions from the substance because people are the problem. Negotiating successfully when there's a power imbalance, when the other side is more powerful than you are. Handling human problems. People's defensive or reactionary behavior is often a reason that negotiations fail. Dealing with the human element of how you're treating the other side and how the people are reacting is critical to success. Whether you're focusing on a specific human issue, or people are just one concern of negotiation, follow these guidelines. Build a good working relationship that's separate from the substance of the negotiations. A good relationship makes it easier to get a good outcome, and good outcomes make a good relationship even better. But don't entangle the relationship with substance. For instance, don't make concessions in order to save the relationship, and don't try to force a concession by threatening the relationship. For instance, by saying something like, "If you really cared, you'd accept the proposal." Let's continue exploring the additional key takeaways of the book to gain further insights and knowledge. 1. Learn to negotiate well. Everything is based on negotiations. This is sometimes hard to imagine, but just a few decades ago decisions were rarely made as a result of discussions or negotiations. They were usually made by one person, whoever was in charge. Back then, the world was a place of hierarchy. At home, every decision concerning the family was made by the wise father, and at work, everybody adhered to the path dictated by the company's boss. Today, such authoritarian structures are increasingly rare. Hierarchies are flatter, information is more accessible, and more people participate in decisions at all levels. Hence, it has become much more important for us to talk to others and include them in our decision-making processes. Politicians now talk to their voters, and companies encourage their employees to participate in company decisions. Even parent-child interactions are becoming more democratic. In the age of Google, parents can no longer simply say, "Don't do this. It's unhealthy," because their child can just go online, find counter-evidence, and argue their claim. Today, finding agreements in any area of life means negotiating. Arguing with friends about which movie to see is very different to haggling over prices with suppliers or negotiating international arms embargoes. Yet in many ways all negotiations are similar to each other. By arming yourself with the right knowledge and tools, you can vastly improve the outcomes of all your negotiations. And since every day of your life involves some kind of negotiating, it's well worth your time to do so. Learn to negotiate well. Everything is based on negotiations. 2. Avoid trench warfare. Costs a lot and brings very little in return. Too often, conflicts turn into trench warfare. Both parties take a position, defend it fiercely, and only make concessions if they have to. In such a situation, finding a solution is not the result of negotiation. Either the more stubborn side wins or a compromise is found that both sides can, more or less, live with. The problem with these types of conflicts is that both parties have fixated on their initial positions. Instead of searching for a good solution together, they both want to win or at least avoid an embarrassing defeat. Such a mindset precludes a win-win solution. This usually results in an open battle which costs a lot of time and energy. Even worse, often both sides will take unnecessarily extreme positions because they expect to have to make concessions. In fact, this only results in longer and more painful arguments. Trench warfare not only makes it more difficult to resolve the conflict at hand, it can also harm the relationships between the two parties. If that 2% discount is more important to you than our long-term business relationship, maybe you should find a different supplier. Trench warfare is bad in many ways. It results in suboptimal solutions at best, consumes a lot of time and energy, and harms relationships. Avoid trench warfare. Costs a lot and brings very little in return. 3. Keep in mind that you're negotiating with people. It is short-sighted to consider a negotiation as a factual discussion between perfectly rational individuals. In negotiations, there is never one reality. There are always at least two subjective interpretations of reality. Both sides always bring their personalities, experiences, values, and emotions to the table. This means they will often look at things differently and have their own interpretations of the facts. Sometimes two people will talk about totally different things without even realizing they are doing so. Also, people can respond very differently to the same situation, especially if it's a stressful one. A long, intense discussion can make one person aggressive, which might irritate the other person and make them defensive. When this happens, any further discussion becomes effectively pointless. In every negotiation, the combination of differing perceptions and strong emotions are pure poison to finding a mutually satisfactory result. And, unfortunately, rational arguments are not the cure. Every negotiation actually happens on two distinct levels: the level of factual arguments and the level of human perceptions and emotions. It's never possible to completely separate these two levels, of course. But keep in mind that there's always an interpersonal level at play in addition to the facts, and that this can be the source of many conflicts or misunderstandings. Hence, address emotions like anger or fear. This requires empathy and the willingness to consider not only the facts but also the people you are dealing with. Keep in mind that you're negotiating with people. Fight the problem, not the person you're negotiating with. The goal of a negotiation should never be to win, as if the other party were an opponent. Rather, both parties should focus on finding a long-term solution together. This is why negotiators should always separate the factual level of an argument from the interpersonal level. If you want to negotiate successfully, always remain on the level of facts. Of course, this only works if both sides are willing to approach the problem rationally rather than emotionally. This means both have to see each other as partners striving for a win-win solution, not as enemies in a battle that only one side can win. Ideally, you should both distance yourselves from the topic at hand and look at it together from a somewhat neutral perspective. Sometimes it helps to simply sit on the same side of the table. This way, the issue is no longer perceived as a battle between you but rather as a problem on the table in front of you, and one that can be solved together. Both parties should strive to use neutral language and stick to the facts. Never stoop to attacks of a personal nature, and never accuse the other person of being unreasonable, no matter how absurd you find their position. When you do, you create distance, which can cause the other person to lose sight of the facts and respond on a purely emotional level. For example, a separated couple shouldn't argue about who is to blame for a failed marriage. Rather, they should discuss which future arrangements are going to be best for their children. Fight the problem, not the person you're negotiating with. 5. Before you search for solutions, understand both parties' underlying interests. Often the positions of the two sides in a negotiation seem incompatible. Take a married couple's holiday plans, for example. I want to spend the holidays by the sea versus I want to go to the Alps. But when you look below the surface at the interests behind these two positions, you may be surprised at the new solutions that can arise, often without necessitating any compromises. If the husband wants to go to the sea so that he can swim and his spouse wants to go to the Alps to rock climb, why not spend the holidays by a mountain lake? However, often a position is based on a myriad of interests and not just one. In the example above, the couple's differing positions could be the result of many different expectations about geography, accommodation, food, etc. To find a constructive solution, try to understand all the relevant interests. Once you have identified the differences, it's much easier to prioritize and discover where painless concessions are possible. What's their goal? Where do you agree? Where are the main differences between your position and theirs? And above all, where do those differences come from? Often people's main drivers are their basic needs for recognition, control, security, and belonging. If you don't know what is driving the other person, ask them, e.g., why do you want to go to the Alps? Or what makes you object to this? At the same time, make sure you understand your own drivers and interests. Express them openly before you come up with suggestions. Only when both sides' interests are clear will you find a solution that both sides are happy with. Before you search for solutions, understand both parties' underlying interests. 6. Outline options before you search for solutions. When two people negotiate, they typically already have a clear vision of what kind of outcome they would like. Often they bring draft contracts, hoping to convince the other person to agree to them. Such solutions are bound to fail. They are inherently imbalanced because they're based on one position only. They're just too narrow to provide a realistic foundation for a joint solution. Rather than bringing such one-sided proposals to the table, be open to discussing all kinds of potential solutions, and only accept one that both parties happily agree with. Consider someone asking you, who do you think will win the Nobel Prize in Literature next year? Most likely, you wouldn't immediately come up with one name. Instead, you would assemble a list of candidates and choose one after consideration. This is exactly how you should search for the outcome of a negotiation. Think of the negotiation consisting of two distinct phases. First, you outline potential solutions, and only then you actually agree on something. Do not mix up the two. Start by highlighting the most extreme positions, go through different scenarios and consider the details. Be creative, scribble sketches, hold brainstorming sessions, ask experts, etc. Consider making a good-natured game out of coming up with the most extreme positions, e.g. by asking, what would the liberals say? What about the hardcore conservatives? You will end up with many potential solutions, and, as you move into the second phase of discussing them, hopefully some will prove acceptable for both sides. Outline options before you search for solutions. 7. Always find objective criteria to base your decision on. No matter how good your intentions, surprising your negotiation partner with a fully formulated suggestion for a solution is not a good way to move the negotiation forward. The other person will usually disagree and respond either defensively or aggressively. Instead, first find the right criteria to base your decision on. These should be unambiguous and objective so there is no room for misinterpretation on either side. For instance, the fair price for a house is not just the target price either the seller or the buyer had in mind. A fair price should be estimated based on things such as the average price per square meter, the condition of the building, and the prices for similar homes in the area. All these criteria are objective and testable. When negotiating, both sides should openly state their criteria for evaluating the quality of the solution. The criteria don't have to be identical, but they should be objective and understandable. Never give in to pressure or to an ultimatum. If someone gives you a figure and says, "That's my last offer," simply ask what the underlying criteria are, e.g., why do you consider that a fair price? Often there will be no tried and tested yardsticks, gold standards, or precedents you can rely on. Nevertheless, always try to find objective criteria to base your decision on. Whenever it's impossible to find the right criteria, make sure you at least have a fair decision process. This aspect of negotiation is understood even in kindergarten, where they teach the I cut, you choose method. When a cookie is to be divided among two children, the first child cuts the cookie, but he'd better be fair because the second child gets to choose which half goes to whom. Always find objective criteria to base your decision on. To negotiate well, you have to be well prepared. Never attend a negotiation unprepared. Preparation means knowing as much as possible about the facts beforehand. Gather all the information you can and study your data closely. Learn about both the people you'll deal with as well as the specific context of the negotiation. What drives the other person? What are their interests and their goals? Are they independent in their decision, or do they have to consider the interests of their bosses, partners, or spouses? Are there certain personal, political, or religious conditions you should know about? The more things you know, the more you will understand the other person, and the more likely you will both find a constructive solution. The less you know, the more likely that you will end up arguing about non-factual matters based on prejudices, speculations, and emotions. Also, don't underestimate the logistical details of negotiations. When and where should the negotiation take place? At your office? At home? On neutral ground? What about the meeting itself? How should it take place? By phone? Face-to-face? Or even in a larger group? What role does time play? Will pressure in the form of a deadline help or harm the negotiation? By investing time in studying the details and preparing thoroughly, you help to create a positive setting where both sides will feel comfortable. This vastly improves your chances of having a constructive discussion rather than becoming stuck in your initial positions. To negotiate well, you have to be well prepared. 9. Negotiation is communication. Listen and stick to talking about facts. It is no secret that most conflicts and problems would never arise in the first place if there was better communication. Often, misunderstandings and knowledge gaps are what lead to arguments, and better communication can help avoid both these problems. Even if there is an open conflict, make sure your communication is positive and solution-oriented. Keep the discussion going, and don't let the flow be interrupted by both parties becoming fixated on an argument. To do this, you must first of all listen. Don't hear only what you want to hear, but what the other person is really saying. An easy tool is to rephrase what you hear. If I understand you correctly, your point of view is. This way, you show that you're listening, and you avoid misunderstandings from the very start because the other person can immediately clarify if something has been misunderstood. Once you've understood the position of the other person, state what your own interests are. Don't talk about what you consider to be their mistakes and fallacies in his position. Instead, talk about your own expectations and hopes. Never respond emotionally, but, when necessary, give the other person space to vent their anger or other emotions. When such emotions arise, explain them, e.g., I see why you are angry, and I myself was disappointed because. The goal is always to bring the discussion to the level of facts and to keep the discussion flowing. Silence is the end of every negotiation. Negotiation is communication. Listen and stick to talking about facts. 10. Even the best tools can't always guarantee success. In theory, a negotiation should always lead to better results if both sides are open, structure their negotiation correctly, use objective criteria, and strive to find an ideal solution together. But you can never force the other person to act in a certain way or to give up their extreme position or irrational expectations. You can only try. It can help to open the discussion by outlining the matter at hand as well as the process you would like to follow in the negotiation. Agree on how you want to negotiate and how you will make a decision. If the other person refuses to follow such a process, or if they use dirty tricks such as the classic good cop, bad cop, or the insidious, I would love to, but my boss, Then address this openly. Make it clear you will only accept a discussion based on an understanding of both sides' interests and focused on objective decision criteria. In addition to the process of your negotiation, there are other factors that can impact the outcome of the negotiation. For instance, whenever there is an imbalance in power between the two sides, like when you discuss a wage raise with your boss, you can only point out why you think it would be beneficial for both you and her to negotiate at eye level. But in the end, she will decide on how the negotiation goes and you will have to accept it. And remember, though most things in life are up for negotiation, some remain completely non-negotiable. Not even the best trained and most experienced negotiators would be able to buy the White House, for example. Even the best tools can't always guarantee success. The key message in this book is, don't consider conflicts a zero-sum game. Avoid trench warfare and instead try to understand and address the underlying interests of all parties. Stick to the facts, remember you're dealing with humans, and stay open-minded when it comes to solutions. The questions answered in this book. Why is it valuable to learn how to negotiate well? Learn to negotiate well. Everything is based on negotiations. Avoid trench warfare. Costs a lot and brings very little in return. What does it mean to negotiate? Keep in mind that you're negotiating with people. Fight the problem, not the person you're negotiating with. Before you search for solutions, understand both parties' underlying interests. Which tools and tricks can you use? Outline options before you search for solutions. Always find objective criteria to base your decision on. To negotiate well, you have to be well prepared. Negotiation is communication. Listen and stick to talking about facts. Even the best tools can't always guarantee success. In conclusion, Getting to Yes is a must-read for anyone looking to improve their negotiation skills and achieve win-win outcomes in any scenario. By adopting the principles outlined in the book, you can become a more effective negotiator and build stronger relationships with others. If you're interested in learning more about negotiation strategies and how to reach mutually beneficial agreements, be sure to check out Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. You can find the link to acquire a copy of this incredible book in the description below. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you found this book summary helpful, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more book summaries and insightful content. And share this uplifting summary with someone who may benefit from hearing them. Leave a comment down below if you've read this book or have any other recommendations for us. Until next time, stay awesome and keep learning.